Hey everybody, I'm Robert Donovan. Welcome to this episode of Not Trekonomics. You know, it's perfectly astonishing how far a $10,000 to $15,000 a year income can go if it's unencumbered by debt. In the last episode, I admonished you all to make extra payments on your loans. Now, most people can only afford to make extra payments on one loan at a time, though. And that means that some thought is needed as to how best to apply the extra payment. Now, the catchy names aside, you basically have about 5 choices for the method of paying off your loans. First, you can apply the payment in the order of to the loan in order of highest to lowest interest rate. You can apply it in the order of lowest to highest current balance. You can apply it in the order of what you might call greatest to least emotional annoyance, some combination of those 3. And lastly, you can choose a debt consolidation. This is where knowing how to calculate your interest costs and knowing what's important to you comes in really handy. Now, one thing I do recommend before doing anything else in this exercise is that you calculate the monthly interest costs. If you don't know how to do that, see the previous episode. I show you how to do that there. But calculate the monthly interest costs for all of your debts and list them from highest to lowest interest costs. And this gives you a basic measure for comparison and can be a good motivator to pay your debts off faster. So, first, apply the payment to each debt in order of highest to lowest interest rate, and then as you pay each debt off, take the payment from that debt and put it towards the next one. Now, mathematically, this will nearly always be the cheapest way to pay off your debts unless one of your low-interest loan balances is really, really high. One basic way to implement this strategy across all your debts is to take the monthly interest calculations above and simply pay the loans with the highest ranking monthly interest payment every month. That generally winds up you pay the highest interest loans off first, and virtually always winds up you pay the least interest you possibly can. Add the monthly payment for each loan that you pay off, as I said, to the next one on the list. There are 2 potential problems with doing it this way, and I know there are those who regard with almost religious fervor this strategy. There are, however, a couple of things you need to be aware of about it that can maybe make it not a good fit for you. First, it is depressingly slow to show results if the balance on your high-interest loans is very high and you can only afford a small extra payment. Second, it reduces back-end interest costs. It does not reduce your current expenses today. Now, and that means that whole time, an unexpected expense or a drop in income in the midst of trying to do this can result in missed or late payments. So if your employment or your paycheck or your expenses are in any way inconsistent, or you're not sure that you're going to have a pretty steady income long enough to pay off your high interest loans, this can be a significant risk. Which brings us to your second option, which is you apply the extra payment to each debt in order of lowest to highest balance rather than the interest rate, and then add the monthly payment from each loan you pay off to the extra monthly payment for the subsequent loan, the next highest balance. To implement this strategy, take the list of interest payments and pay the loans with the lowest ranking monthly interest rates first. This will almost certainly increase your interest costs, but you need to do the math because it's often a very small percentage of your total debt when you get started because the extra payment gets very, very big by the time you get to the higher interest loans. The benefits are, however, compelling. First, it maximizes the extra principal that you can pay off at the start, and because you're paying off small loans relatively quickly, and you don't have to keep, it reduces, you get one less bill you have to pay when you pay those low balance loans off. It tends to reduce your front-end current expenses more quickly as you pay off the smaller loans. That allows you to make bigger extra payments on the bigger loans without having to find extra money. And it also allows more flexibility if your income or expenses fluctuate after you've had a chance to pay off a couple of the smaller loans, because you now, if your income drops a little bit, you may not be able to make an extra payment, but at least you can make a minimum payment and have your balance not go up because you missed or had a late payment. It also provides a psychological boost of showing some early progress at the start. Speaking of psychological boost, that brings us to number 3, and that is simply apply your extra payment based on which debt annoys you the most, regardless of the balance or the interest rate. For instance, Say you have a student loan in a non-STEM, that's science, technology, engineering, math, hobby degree, or even if you have one of these, and your work hours fluctuate a lot week to week. Since student loans can't be readily discharged through bankruptcy, you may feel a lot better paying it off first so your income fluctuations they don't continue to be as big a problem, and you can more effectively use bankruptcy protection should it turn out you need it. On the other hand, if you find that getting rid of your other debts makes the student loan not so much a problem, then hit those first using one of the methods above. Type of debt also matters here. You make extra payments, for example, on a student loan or a mortgage all day long, and the payment doesn't change, but the minimum payments on your credit card balances do go down as you pay them off. And I'm going to do a separate episode on why that is so and how that calculation is done differently for each. It's not so much useful at this stage, but it is interesting to keep in mind. So, the fact that your minimum payments on your credit cards can go down as you pay them off can be a motivator in itself to push you to pay them off faster. And credit cards usually have pretty high interest rates, so you're kind of implementing strategy number one as kind of a hybrid. These reasons are all psychological, I admit, but they are valid, they are absolutely real, and they are purely a matter of personal preference. Which approach do I think you should use? Well, obviously, I don't really judge them that way. If your balances are, say, within a few $100 of each other, and the interest rates, your interest rates are basically the same, but your balances are all within a few $100 of each other, or maybe your interest rates are all over the map, but your balances are pretty close. In that case, I would go interest rates should determine your decision. If the interest rates are all within a percentage point or two, but your balances vary a lot, well, in that case, I would recommend maybe you want to look at hitting lowest balances first, because that might work best for you. But again, talk to a financial advisor. I am not one, but that's kind of how I would look at it. But outside of those two ideal situations for each strategy, it really kind of depends on a lot of different things. Your income level relative to your debts, your income stability, the type of debt you're talking about, the interest rate that you're being charged, your current balances, and your own personal annoyance threshold, if you will. This is why I told you to calculate and rank the interest costs first, by the way, because it kind of gives you a relevant yardstick relevant to your personal situation and preferences. So, for example, one of the things you want to keep in mind is that a high enough balance on a low interest loan can cost you as much, at least initially, or more as a lower balance on a high interest loan. Remember, your interest is charged, the interest portion of your payment is based on your current balance. So the higher that is, the more you're paying in interest. That's why ranking your interest rates, your interest portions for each payment once a month is a good idea. It's also usually easier to pay extra principal on a low interest loan, by the way. So consider your individual circumstances in light of the math and pick the strategy or combination that works best for you. There is also nothing wrong with switching between the three. So, basic example, if you've got, let's say, a lot of smaller debts, say under $1,000, and they have low interest rates, and you got a few large ones with high interest rates and can only scrape up a small extra monthly payment, well, there'd be nothing wrong with paying off the small low-interest debts first, combining those payments into a larger extra payment, and then switching, when you get to the bigger loans, to the highest interest first method, because those higher balance and higher interest rates are definitely going to cost you more, and you've now got a little money where you can really throw an extra payment at them. So anything that helps you to stick to the goal of getting debt-free faster is a good thing in my book, especially if adverse circumstances are at all likely to develop along the way, and believe me, they always develop when you least expect them. They are totally good reasons, all of these things, not to follow any one debt reduction strategy strictly or exclusively as far as paying off your loans. Now, that brings us to option number 4. Suppose you are really looking at some onerous debts. You've got them split. You've got 5 or 6 loans. It's really a headache to keep track of all of them. And someone comes in and says, hey, why don't you just consolidate them all into a single loan? We can lower your payment. Your total cost of all your loans is now going to be less. If we consolidate, the total cost for that will be less than the total payments for all your individual loans. Isn't that a great deal? Well, again, it depends. Consolidations can lower your total payments for the payment for the consolidation can be lower than the total payments for all your individual loans, but even then I don't like them. There are 4 problems with this. First, they tend to mask the fact that you're spending too much, which has to be addressed first, and you really want to see to that. Even if you find yourself with several credit cards, that's not a good sign either. Deal with your spending first and make sure you've got that as low as possible before you can even consider a consolidation. Second, they transfer your debts. They don't clear them. So yeah, you've got a lower payment total. Your payment is actually higher, because if you take the payment for loan 1, the payment for loan 2, the payment for loan 3, the payment for loan 4, add those together, that's going to be X. Well, the payment for your consolidation will probably be less than X, but they don't clear the loan. You've now got a lower payment. The temptation is to go on a spending spree, and a lot of people, frankly, quite stupidly do that, and they make they make their matters worse because they basically go on a spending spree. Some of them even do it with credit cards, which is no more self-destructive behavior I can think of, and that just makes the situation worse. That brings me to the third thing. You may get a lower overall payment with a consolidation, but you do it at the cost of your current balance gets way bigger, and they lengthen the term of the loan. And that's how they get the payment down, is by lengthening the term of the loan. And I guarantee you the combination of those two will more than offset any benefit from a lower payment, unless you take the savings from the total of all your individual loans, and then the difference between that and your lower payment for the consolidation. If you use that to make extra payments on the consolidation for a couple of years, then they can be a good deal. But most people don't do that, and they just wind up going deep. You're basically just going deeper in debt to no benefit. That's the other thing about a consolidation to keep in mind. Before we get to that, to recap, to sort of summarize that, what I just said about the bigger balance on the longer term, it more than offsets any benefit from the lower payment unless you're making extra payments to the principal. That's the only thing that makes it. If they don't lower the payment to do a consolidation, don't do it, because they're useless. They're utterly useless. They're lengthening the term. They're costing you more interest. The balance goes up. The math just says don't do it. A consolidation, fourth, always puts you back at the start of the amortization curve, which guarantees you pay the maximum possible interest on this brand. You're basically getting a brand new loan, and you're paying maximum possible interest on it. It's nearly always far cheaper to reduce and simplify your payments by paying your debts off individually using one of the methods above. So takeaways for this episode, just one. Use whatever debt paydown strategy or combination that you can stick to, and do it until you're debt free. It'll be worth the extra interest cost to get there rather than not, but definitely avoid consolidations. That's the big caveat there. Consolidations are one of the other last traps that a banker gets you into, either before you go into bankruptcy or the last trap they get to get that last grab for your money. So, let's say you've done as much as you can to reduce your expenses, you've cut them to the bone, you've sold all your stuff, you've taken a second or third job, tried to negotiate with your lenders and made a good faith effort to pay your debts, but your income has changed, you've lost a job, and you can't replace the income, and your total income that you have now is still less than your combined monthly payments for your debts and minimal living expenses. That's the time to consider bankruptcy. We'll talk about that next. Thanks for watching. Comments are always welcome, and may the balance of your day be awesome.